Thank you everyone for joining us for the International Progressive MS Alliance's final webcast of 2025. I'm Mark Offord and I work as Brand Strategic Lead for the MS Society in the UK. I also live with secondary progressive MS, so I've got a deep personal vested interest, I guess, in the future of where research will take us. I was diagnosed about 20 years ago, and back in 2019 I participated in the MS STAT2 trial at University College London that explored whether a widely tried and tested cholesterol lowering drug, simvastatin, could slow disability progression. Although that trial did not herald the results that so many of us were hoping for, it was a hugely positive experience for me and gave me the most excellent understanding of my own MS and access to some of the most dedicated and determined team of experts I could have really dreamt for. In fact, I enjoyed it so much, I stayed on for the extended element of the trial, and I would sign up for another trial tomorrow. I've got my name down for Octopus, so let's see where that goes. My experience of being on a trial has really fueled my optimism for the future, and I'm looking forward to hearing about all the projects that our great guests will be sharing with us today. So, last year, the Alliance invited researchers to apply for funding to support new and creative studies about progressive MS via experimental medicine trial awards. These studies aim to help us understand how treatments work inside the body at the cell level, learn more about biological processes that cause damage to the nervous system in progressive MS, and also make sure the ways we measure results are accurate and consistent. So in our discussion today, we want to share with you some of the progress being made within these fantastic research projects. The three panelists joining us today have received funding for these awards, two of which are working on full clinical trials and one on a planning and development award, which aims to grow into a full clinical trial. They are all working on projects that are researching existing drugs and how they may be effective for treatments for progressive MS. Before I introduce you to our panelists today, I'd just like to recognise our webcast sponsors and share some information about the International Progressive MS Alliance. First, we'd like to thank our sponsors Sanofi and Genentech for their generous support of the Alliance and for making today's webcast possible. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the work of the International Progressive MS Alliance, it's an unprecedented global collaboration of 19 MS organisations, researchers, clinicians, pharmaceutical companies, and maybe most importantly, people with progressive MS, working together to address the unmet needs of people affected by progressive MS. By 2030, the Alliance will have committed more than 60 million euros to research networks and discovery projects, all with the aim of accelerating the development of new treatments, better and faster clinical trials, and well-being strategies for people living with progressive MS. So now let's just meet the panelists that have given their very precious time to join us today, which is fantastic. So if you could maybe just let us know your names, give us a brief overview of everything that you're working on at the moment, the projects that you're working on. So if I could just start with Dr. Eiras.
Yes, hello. My name is Laura Eiras. I'm an academic neurologist based in Turku, Finland.
Super. Let's pass over to Dr. Mowry.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ellen Mowry. I'm a neurologist and researcher at the Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, Maryland.
And last but not least, let's pass the baton to Dr. Young.
Hello all, I'm Wee Young. I'm a professor and neuroimmunologist working in the laboratory on MS at the University of Calgary in Canada.
Wow. All across the world. Wow. If you could just give us all a very brief overview, I'll stick with you, Dr. Young, for a moment. Just a brief overview of the specific project that you're working on right now, and then we'll just sort of pass across, and then I'll come back to you if that's okay.
Sure. We are assessing salbutamol, a medication used in asthma to address whether it can slow the progression of disability in animal models of MS through promoting myelin repair. We are also asking whether the efficacy of salbutamol can be further promoted when combined with another generic medication, ibudilas. Altogether, we are hoping to not only slow progression of disability, but hopefully also to elicit some degree of recovery, at least in preclinical models at this point.
Wow. Okay. I find that fascinating because I'm from an asthma family myself. I always think of salbutamol as the blue inhaler, but I've never heard of the other medication. So how interesting. Very interesting. Right, we'll come back to you in a moment on that. Dr. Iras, what's your project that you're working on?
Yes, thank you. So we are very excited to soon start the clinical trial where repurposed hydroxychloroquine is tested against placebo as treatment for progressive MS. So hydroxychloroquine is an anti-inflammatory drug which is presently used to treat rheumatoid diseases or is used as an anti-malarial treatment in some parts of the world. So we chose hydroxychloroquine because it's known to enter the brain, and in cell culture experiments, it dampens activation of microglial cells, which is promising for treatment of progressive MS, as activated microglia are the cell type which have a significant role in the pathogenesis. There are also some clinical evidence that hydroxychloroquine could slow down disease progression in primary progressive MS. This small open-label trial was actually run in Calgary and was published in Annals of Neurology in 2021. But using positron emission tomography or PET imaging, we can measure the impact of hydroxychloroquine on microglial activation in patients' brains. So we intend to recruit 34 patients, and the treatment duration will be 1 year. So by doing this study, we can provide proof of concept that measurement of microglial activation using PET is a feasible approach in early phase progressive MS trials, but the study will also give evidence whether hydroxychloroquine treatment leads to reduction in microglial activation in patients with progressive MS. So if the findings from this trial are positive, we can then move forward in making hydroxychloroquine widely available for people with progressive MS.
Wow. And Dr. Mowry, what are you currently working on?
So the study that the Alliance funded for us is looking at a glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist, or GLP-1RA. These are medications that are approved currently to treat illnesses like obesity and diabetes. And we got really excited about repurposing a GLP-1RA for multiple sclerosis because a lot of work that we and others have done over the years has demonstrated that people who carry these comorbid illnesses are at much higher risk of having their nerve cells in their brain die faster than people who don't. And of course, we know that death of neurons in the brain and in the spinal cord is what underlies progressive MS. And so we thought that would be a really interesting way to see if we could slow down nerve cell death and thus slow down progression. And in addition, one of my colleagues studied the medication that we've chosen to move forward to the clinical trial, which is called NLY-01. in animal models of MS and demonstrated that indeed the treatment with that particular medication not only reduced inflammation in and outside of the nervous system, but also slowed down the death of neurons during the animal model event. So our trial is essentially randomizing individuals who participate to either receive the medication or a masked placebo, and we're looking at many outcome measures to see if the medication in fact does slow down nerve cell death. We'll also, of course, be looking at how it affects people clinically and side effects and things to that extent.
Oh, wow. I find that fascinating. I guess there's the correlation. You mentioned diabetes, and then Dr. Young, you were talking about asthma medication as well. I find it absolutely fascinating because there's the work being done on metformin, isn't there, and clemastine at the moment as well, which of course diabetes drug and a hay fever drug, an antihistamine and things. So there seems to be a lot of commonality in these repurposed drugs around what you mentioned around comorbidity. But just sort of, I'll throw this out over to you, Dr. Young, for starters. So why is repurposing existing drugs an important approach to, say, developing new ones? Do you have a view on that?
Sure. Well, for existing drugs, there would already be a lot of information on those drugs, such as their spectrum of activity, their efficacy, their side effects, tolerability, etc. So we can actually bring that knowledge. So we hit a road running, so to speak, to MS if the rationale for thinking about that drug in MS is appropriate. So basically, then, when working with existing drugs, we start with a high degree of knowledge. We will still do safety testing in models of MS or in phase 1 trials of people living with MS, but the safety studies do not have to be as exhaustive and as extensive. So overall, we shorten the costs. We can take a few shortcuts if you like, but definitely we shorten the timeline from conception of idea to application. That would be the power of repurposing existing medications that we think could be very useful in MS.
I find that fascinating as from a patient's perspective, because I'd say that was probably the, you mentioned side effects, the potential minimization or at least known side effects. That was probably what made me sign up for the simvastatin trial, for the MS STAT2 trial. I could be confident as a patient of what I'd be dealing with over quite a long, sustained period of time. And I was thinking, yeah, this is a safe drug. My mum and dad even take it. It gave me that kind of confidence to think, okay, I can commit to this for a few years, and there's unlikely anything too scary going to happen to me. So that's, quite interesting. Quite interesting. Dr. Aras, Dr. Mari, do you have any kind of alternative views on that, or are you kind of aligned to what Dr. Young is saying?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, sometimes we're always looking for a new fancy shiny toy, when a toy that's already in our toy chest will work really well. And it would be a shame to overlook the toy chest of toys and only, myopically think about new things. I think, there are a lot of strategies to sort of think about how to identify which currently available medications might be useful. That probably deserve some work, but I think if there's something there that will already benefit people with MS, we have to go after it and go after it hard. Time's a ticking.
I agree.
Absolutely.
It's really the speed, like the much faster timeline, which is a huge benefit when repurposing the drugs. And of course, the safety profile is known, so you really know what to focus on, when monitoring the patients in terms of safety. Of course, for every indication, also the side effects can vary a bit. So of course, you still have to be vigilant, like Dr. Young was saying. But I think these are the greatest benefits.
How do you, I'm just interested to know a bit more about how you would decide, where to start. Which, which you open up Pandora's box of the medication. It's like, right, where do we start? Which drug are worth investigating? What kickstarts that, Dr. Aris?
Yes, of course, we would look into the existing knowledge regarding the potential compounds' relevance to progression promoting pathology. So us in Turku, because of our expertise in PET imaging, we are particularly interested in compounds which have shown evidence that they may modify the status of the harmful microglial cells in brain. And another really important starting point is that the drug should be brain penetrant so that it can actually get to the site of action. And of course, it's also important that the drug would be available for utilization in a trial, and preferably with low cost and with minimal side effects.
Yeah, thanks. One of the first questions I recall asking one of the doctors, one of the consultants on the trial that I was on, was around, let's imagine a hypothetical scenario where this drug does what everybody wants it to do. What kind of time frame might we be looking at to get it from the end of a trial, out to market, particularly as it's a repurposed drug? My naivety would have made me thought maybe, yeah, it's instantaneous. You get there really quick. But Dr. Mary, what sort of scientific or regulatory hurdles might there be to getting something successful to market?
Yeah, I mean, I have two minds about that. I think for repurposed medications, physicians are typically able, at least in the United States, to prescribe things off-label. So sometimes we have this hat that we're wearing where we're thinking, oh, we have to get a specific approval for multiple sclerosis. But for example, had the statin trial demonstrated a marked benefit that was very conclusive, I wouldn't wait for regulatory approval, to be honest, to discuss that treatment with somebody I was seeing in the clinic. I would say, look, this is looking very promising. And we know that these are the side effects are the same as or different than, we see in other populations. I think we should probably start a statin, or I think we should probably start hydroxychloroquine. Like, I wouldn't really wait. I would use it off label and just carefully document the rationale. So I think that actually is another part of the sped up timeline, that if you see something is successful, you don't really have to wait.
And how does that differ across the world? Because we're all sitting here talking from different four corners of the world at the moment. So does anybody else have a different experience of how that is in your territory?
So in Finland, we would also have the opportunity or the possibility to use a drug off label. So it's really up to the treating a doctor whether they would want to make that decision or not. But of course, it would also be very nice to be able to do a larger study where you could actually show the clinical efficacy of the drug. And this can be, of course, very challenging with these repurposed drugs, which often may be old drugs. They may be off patent, so maybe there are not so big sort of economical gains when studying this or using these drugs. So it may be challenging to do a large phase 3 trial with such an old drug, but it would be, to my mind, very nice to be able to also show the clinical efficacy. And definitely we will be looking into this if our initial study shows some promising effects. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, that would be one of the big hurdles of repurposing a generic medication. Even when you have clinical data in a clinical trial, such as what is called a phase 2 trial to indicate efficacy. The FDA might still want results from a phase 3 trial in progressive MS, a very large trial involving, hundreds of individuals before formal approval. And for a generic drug in which there is no support from our pharmaceutical partners that are important players in the drug development process, because that's not their focus, it is often difficult to amass the kind of resources that are needed for a large phase 3 trial. But often, across the world, our colleagues would be compelled by the data that's presented to them. From these studies, when promising, the data will be spelled out in the open literature. Our colleagues will assess them, and as our clinicians here have said, will be able to consider them as off-label drugs to treat progressive MS.
Yeah, I think for me, it's always most important point to do no harm. So I think so. What we are now investigating is, of course, treatments that would be targeting the brain compartmentalized inflammation and the brain compartmentalized pathology. But I think we would still need to continue preventing the focal inflammatory activity using, our approved anti-inflammatory drugs. So I see these additional drugs as additional. So I think we should really aim for add-on treatments and target the both types of pathology that we now know exist in MS. So we wouldn't take anything away from the patients, but we would potentially give them another drug which would then calm down the pathology in the brain and thereby slow down progression.
How would
really good points, right? That we don't just sort of flippantly prescribe things, even if they're off-label. There is a certain degree of scientific evidence that one has to generate. But also to your point, Mark, I think that necessarily the end of that road, if it looks great and the trials are promising at a scalable level, then getting a label per se is not a barrier for repurposed drugs. Whereas, of course, for not previously marketed medication, it would require not only the phase 3 trial, but then the regulatory process to bring that medication forward. So, I think those are all really good points.
I would say
Larry, you just mentioned. Sorry, no, you carry on, Doctor.
Yeah, so this brings up for me another advantage of repurposing generic medications. Often in many medical conditions these days, one is thinking about the use of combination therapies with our approved therapies that many of which are still patented and quite inaffordable in many parts of the world. It is outrageous to think about using 2 drugs in combination or 3. But with generic medications that are affordable, one has the prospect of combining these medications to affect different aspects of the pathology of multiple sclerosis. After having assessed, of course, that it is safe to put these drugs in combination, one would not want to simply take, generic medications in combination without the appropriate safety data that Laura has just emphasized. Do no harm.
How does the voice of the patient influence the direction of your research? A big question.
Well, shall I begin? Well, I think
please. Yeah, I'm really interested to know.
For me, it influences a great deal. I'm a laboratory researcher that seeks to bring new medications into people with MS. I want to know from people living with MS what the challenges are and what the things that I'm doing matter to them or not. So before starting this program that is now funded by the Alliance, we reached out through our MS Clinic database to individuals living with MS to ask whether or not reducing disability and promoting repair would be important outcomes for them. And resoundingly, they told us that that would be. So that gives me confidence that I, as a lab researcher, is going down the right path and hopefully doing the right thing and moving the field in the right direction. So for me, it matters tremendously.
Fantastic. How do you feel, Lara?
Yeah, I mean, totally, I agree. So, of course, I see lots of patients in the clinic, and some of them are really experiencing progression despite of using the best treatments to stop relapses and focal inflammatory activity. And this progression independent of relapse activity is at the moment really the greatest unmet need in the MS field. And it's really this very strong message from the clinic, from our patients, that has driven the direction of our research now for almost 2 decades.
I
Dr.
feel
Mary,
the
do you have
same way. Yeah, the people I serve are really at the heart of every research question that we develop. When people in my clinic ask me the same questions over and over again, and I think there's not a great evidence base for answering that question, it starts to trigger a research question, and that I like to think about putting into the context of a study. And I've always really appreciated in my career thinking about things that people with MS can do to affect change in their own outcomes, which is why we got excited in studying cardiometabolic diseases and their relationship to outcomes in people with MS. And we started to do small clinical trials intervening on these funded by the National MS Society. And learning some really interesting and important results from, say, fasting diets and how they change our biology but are not feasible. And then so that turns into like, okay, well, what could we do to that would intervene on these pathways but also be more feasible for people? So always starts with the people we serve, and then percolates and kind of forms over time into cogent research projects.
that was a really
Maybe I
unifying.
can add that this is really the beauty of being a clinician scientist, because you really see the problems immediately in your clinic, and then you can try to plan your research and create your studies according to that, and according to the questions that are really raised in the clinic. And I think Dr. Maury put it very well.
Absolutely. I have to say, from a personal level, I found that aspect of it really, really strong on the trial that I was on, far more so than I had imagined when I walked into the trial. There was a real spirit, a unified spirit of all being in it together. There was a determination of everybody, and there was a blurring of the lines between doctor and patient, and it was really, really encouraging. And actually, the wider community aspect, getting to meet other people that were on the trial, even if it was just sitting in the waiting room and talking to them before they were going in for their whatever it was, a 9-hole peg test or their MRI scan or something, just the chatter that you'd have. It's really, really lovely to be able to just feel like you were all in the same game and were all pointing to the same kind of North Star. It was a really, really, really nice thing. So I'm super mindful of time. So finally, I'm just going to throw out a question to you all. I'll start with you, Dr. Murray. Just what can people living with MS and other advocates, their family, their friends, their care teams do to support research like yours?
Well, I think, first of all, something you just touched on is really important. I think one of the most fun things about doing this work is that we all are really important pieces of the puzzle in solving, especially progressive MS. And every person who plays in a role, from, the study coordinators to the companies that are, donating medications, to the societies that are funding it, and most importantly, to the people living with MS who participate in the research, right? Like the work does not continue without the people affected by MS taking that willingness to participate. But beyond that, I think getting engaged with the community is really great. I know it's affected me personally. I do like a lot of bike MS and walk MS and a lot of fundraising, and it's very humbling to see how many people out there in the world are spending their time raising money, dedicating their training energies and that sort of thing, because they care about somebody living with MS, including individuals with MS themselves. I really think, especially these days, advocacy is really helpful as well. Lobbying your representatives and governments and things like that to continue funding can be quite helpful as well. So yeah, I think the community that we live in is so inspiring and great, and it's such a big, meaningful problem. But working together is just a really powerful, uplifting component of every day.
Fantastic. Right, Dr. Young, would you like to add anything to that? And then afterwards, Dr. Iras, before we wrap up.
Sure. Research costs money. It's very expensive to do research. I, as a laboratory researcher, relies on grants, but also donations from the public. And, we need to continue to encourage that sort of support and advocacy. And also having foundations, the alliance in the picture is a huge deal. Laura earlier on said that the hydroxychloroquine work started in Calgary, and it did. If I may pat myself on the back, it started in my lab. And it's really, really nice to see the alliance now taking that on from a well-established researcher like Laura, specializing in PET imaging to look for now evidence that this will work in humans. So this continuing journey, the fundraising, all to address research costing money. These are all huge things that I'm very thankful to the community for.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that has been said. And I would like to add also that there's really no better support than a positive attitude towards the research, and also the willingness to participate in our trials. And I must say that our patients are really highly motivated to take part in our research, and I'm extremely thankful to all our patients for this.
That's fantastic. And it's great to hear about all the pioneering work you're doing. It gives me hope and positive optimism for the future of where this will all take us. So thank you again for your time. I know time is very precious at the moment. So thank you for all of the work that you're doing to solve progressive MS. And just like to finish off by thanking you all again, thanking the International Progressive MS Alliance for facilitating this and making it happen. We invite you to stay connected to us through the website and through our LinkedIn page, as well as of course, your own local MS organisation. So thank you again, everybody. Have a fantastic time, and I hope our paths will meet again in the future. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.